right, joining us now is Marcos Vélez, a candidate for lieutenant governor. He's here to talk about his campaign, the issues driving his run, and his vision for the future of Texas. Marcos, welcome to Hello Houston.
Thank you guys for having me.
I tell you, have you run before for any office?
I have not run for public office. Run for several positions within organized labor, but never public office.
So this is quite the ring to throw your hat in.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
What made you want to do that?
I think it's the reality that every Texan feels. Politicians, they talk about our struggles, our issues. They campaign on our pain. But when they talk about instability in the grid, it's not a grid that they actually have to deal with. They have the money and the resources to avoid the outages. When you look at the lack of jobs and opportunities for young people, their children will never struggle to find jobs. And so someone that's a labor activist and worked within organized labor fighting for higher pay, lower health care costs, better working conditions for Texans, I see a much needed, gap that needs to be filled. And so, hey, look, very astute to how the political process works. Organized labor has a legislative agenda every single year. I'll give you a specific example. We have fought for years to try to pass a veterans bill in the state of Texas, and you would think like, oh, they're asking for some some large ask. We've been asking that they legislate requiring job sites to post notices. Just post a notice right next to your workers' compensation posting, informing veterans of the benefits available to them through the state. You have some benefits available through the Veterans Land Board, different stuff like that. We have not been able to pass that legislation, and it's a wake-up call to the fact that working people issues and normal Texan issues are not of any interest to the people currently running our state legislature.
You know, it's interesting, Mr. Vélez, when I was looking at some of the issues that you would like to bring up, one of them was protecting the American dream, and I was curious what that means, and also good functional government for the people. Talk to us a little bit about that.
So when you look at the American dream, my mother cleaned hotel rooms. She made $4.25 an hour, trying to raise a family on $4. She was able to get a good union job, quadrupled her pay, was able to move out of an apartment and buy a home. She was able to retire at a decent age. She was in her late 50s. To me, that's the American dream. People don't want a handout. They want the opportunity to work their way up in society. When I look now, I see kids graduating from college and they have student debt they could never pay off. More and more jobs are being shipped overseas. We have this ever-growing threat of artificial intelligence replacing, normal working-class people. So when manufacturing was attacked in this country, people moved into the service industry. But now the service industry is being attacked. And so there's only so many jobs. And if we don't do something to protect normal working-class people, then there will be nothing left. And so I believe that for the American dream to exist, you have to have good paying jobs. You have to have funded schools so that people can educate themselves. You have to have a low barrier to entry for college education. And those are all things that when you look at the dysfunctional government that we have, instead of protecting like rural Texans from the exploitation of their groundwater, our government in its dysfunction is allowing data centers to be built. They're allowing billionaires to exploit the right to capture and dig wells that a normal Texan could never dig. And those are things that I want to address for working people.
So how would you implement, in a very practical way, some of the solutions to the issues that you just brought up?
Sure. That's the beauty of the office of the lieutenant governor. The lieutenant governor prioritizes what legislation will move. And so I would prioritize bills that benefit working people, like state minimum wage. If a bill, were to be introduced to raise the state minimum wage, that would get a very low number, which would give it a very high priority in the Senate, make sure it's heard before some of the other bills. We work in a state with the 8th largest economy in the world, yet we have a minimum wage that's lower than 30 other states. We're still sitting at that $7.25 an hour. That's not even poverty. I mean, that's starvation.
Yeah. First of all, the lieutenant governor is arguably the most powerful person in the state in terms of politics. Why is that? Why is this $7 wage just can't get off the move?
I mean, if we're going to be honest, you have to look at the big money in politics. One big thing for me was running a campaign that wasn't funded by big corporate PAC donations. I think you have to follow the money. When you're funded by large special interests, then you have to respond to special interests. I'm running a campaign that's funded by normal everyday Texans, small dollar donations, organized labor, some groups that I align with their values. And so when you look at our current lieutenant governor, you're not going to be able to address working people issues because you've been bought by corporate America. And so it does not benefit these large multinational corporations to have to pay a higher wage, even though payroll only accounts for a small percentage of their total expenditures. We're focused on things like permitting data centers that'll ruin our ground soil and hurt our farmland, instead of worrying about raising the state minimum wage so that single mom that's sitting on a disconnect notice can pay her light bill.
Some might say that this role, the lieutenant governor, is like Frank was just saying, it is an extremely important role. We know that Texans usually vote in a more conservative way. You're essentially going up against a Goliath.
Yes, ma'am.
Why would you put yourself out there like that?
Sure. I have a great job. I love the work that I do in organized labor. But I look at the Texas that my children are walking into, and it's not the same Texas that I was walking into. So if you look back in the early 2000s, even though we were still several years into Republican rule in the state of Texas, there was economic opportunity. Housing was affordable. Public school was decently funded. And now I look at what's left, and it's like after the 30 years of 27, 28, whatever, years of Republican rule, there are literally no opportunities for young people. This is not the Texas that I grew up in. When I look at the amount of hate and division out in the streets, I always laugh. I remember when I was a kid, I was in a garage. There were two men playing pool, and they were discussing Bill Clinton and his opponent. And I don't particularly remember which election that was, who his opponent was, but the funniest thing was they agreed to disagree. They laughed about it, and they kept playing pool. And nowadays, like anything you say that challenges the current regime is automatically a turnoff to anyone that's in the other political party. And I think we've done a really good job of dividing working class people against each other so they don't focus on the real issues.
Well, I hear a lot of issues coming here. Is there any one or two that are particularly on the plate?
So the economy is the biggest one. We have to raise wages, we have to lower housing costs, and we have to expand work opportunities for young people. And then the second one is going to be funding education. Eighth largest economy in the world. There's no reason when we've carried a surplus year after year that we shouldn't be able to fund public education. You look at the voucher scam that they just rolled out. Most of rural Texas do not have private schools. And so you took $1 billion out of public education when we could have raised teacher salaries. We could have funded teacher retirement. There's a million things that we could have done. And we shifted that money out so that we could pay a couple of our wealthy friends, education institutions. And so, look, we have to do better. I mean,
But, Marcos, I got to say, that already happened. We are already here. The assisted voucher program, I know it's like I forget exactly what it's called, but essentially the voucher program is happening. So if you were to take into that role, we understand what everybody says about it, but it's that train is gone. How would you work within what's already happening to better the lives of Texans?
So when you look at jobs, first thing, we have to raise the state minimum wage, so prioritizing legislation that raises the minimum wage. When you look at apprenticeship programs that provide opportunities for young people, the lieutenant governor is over state funding for apprenticeship programs. When you look at lowering the cost of housing for people, that's through an expansion of affordable housing. And then when you look at the problem with education, there are revenue streams like the legalization of THC where we leave tons of money on the table, and that burden is passed down to homeowners instead of capitalizing on something that's already being consumed in the state, taxing it appropriately and ensuring that money is directed into public education. So we could explore additional revenue streams, but we have to have someone that's interested in focusing on fixing those issues, because as long as they stay broken, we have great points to campaign on. But the reality is I'm looking for solutions.
Yeah, some fans out there. Says Marcos Vélez is assistant to the director of District 13 of the United Steelworkers Union. You have some supporters from the USW listening and watching right now, Marcos.
Hey, that's awesome.
Okay, you mentioned the school voucher program in West Texas, or rural Texas, I should say. I don't know why when I think of rural Texas, I automatically think of West Texas. But one of the highlights of your campaign is the rural folks of Texas, which are such an important part of everything we do in Texas. Tell me more about your stance there.
So when you look at rural Texas, they get hit twice. They have some of the lower wages in the state because jobs aren't as easily available. And then when you also look at what they're dealing with, they have a lack of resources. It's harder for them to access a hospital. It's harder for them to find they have less opportunity all the way around. And so we have to invest in rural Texas. We have to ensure that when we raise wages that rural Texas doesn't get left behind. And we have to make sure that they have the same educational opportunities no matter where they live in the state. And so I think rural Texans are taken for granted, like many voters, because they generally vote conservatively. Then conservatives just take them for granted and they don't invest very much in their communities.
So, what would you say to people or even politicians, business leaders who very much favor Texas's right to work, that essentially are looking at the laws and don't necessarily want increased labor costs?
So I would tell them productivity has not kept up, or wages have not kept up with productivity since the 60s. Texas has a very strong economy. A small increase in their cost of labor is not going to put them out of business. What they need to take into account is the more money that Americans have to spend in the economy, the better the economy does as a whole. And so they look at it like an increased cost. Obviously, they're going to try to get away with paying poverty-level wages, but a rising tide lifts all boats. And when working people have more disposable income, people at the lower end of the socioeconomic scale spend more of their money. So that's more money coming right back into their businesses.
Well, I do like that you are taking a position for seniors.
Yes.
You always look at me like that.
Seniors.
Seniors.
Senior citizens.
Those are my people. Tell me where you stand on where the seniors in Texas are.
Look, seniors in Texas should not have to be returning to the workforce due to climbing costs. I believe that people that work their entire life should be able to retire with dignity. I think when you look at the life expectancy of your average man in Texas sitting right at about 74 years old, they sell you this idea that you should work until you're 80, and they want you working past the point of your life expectancy. And so I believe that anyone that works a full-time job should be able to retire with dignity. I believe that soaring costs are forcing our seniors back into the workplace. I believe that concerns for their working children are driving them back into the workplace. And I believe that when you look at healthcare access and many of the things that our seniors need, we're failing them as a state. 8th largest economy in the world. I mean, it's disappointing. I think furthermore, seniors that live in rural Texas have an even harder time accessing health care because of, rural hospitals shutting down, lack of funding. And so imagine if you retired to rural Texas, we will say West Texas because that's what you consider.
Yep.
And you have to drive an hour to get to a hospital. I mean, it does. So fuel costs are higher. I mean, again, we have to do better by our seniors.
But, we're looking at a primary.
Yes, ma'am.
And so looking into the March Democratic primary, what makes you different from the other two candidates, your other opponents?
Sure. Hey, nothing against the candidates. I always tell people, it doesn't really matter who you vote for as long as you go vote. But I think the difference between me and the other two candidates is my lived experience. I am a working Texan. These things directly impact me. When you look at some of the other candidates on the ballot, I don't necessarily know that they live the same day-to-day life as working people, and I think that's why they have to do their research. But more importantly, my lived experience fighting in organized labor, I have delivered rather than just promised higher wages. I have delivered lower health care costs. I have delivered job opportunities, apprenticeship programs, access for women and other marginalized communities that would normally be boxed out of industrial and manufacturing settings. And so where a lot of candidates would talk about they want to do things or they've tried to do things, I've actually done them.
And just to clarify, the other two Democratic candidates for Lieutenant Governor of Texas are State Representative Vikki Goodwin and software company manager Courtney Head.
A couple of more comments from YouTube. I want this guy as my lieutenant governor and Tallarico as my governor. Okay. And then text saying, I'm a Republican, but I like this guy for lieutenant governor. So
That's awesome.
Go get him, Marcos.
Any last thoughts, Marcos? If somebody's listening right now and they say this guy doesn't have a chance, Democrats in Texas, are not winning elections, what do you say to that?
So look, there's always a chance. Look, people didn't think David had a chance when he picked up that rock and that sling, right? But out here fighting, because whether I win this election or not, I believe it's important to pull politicians in towards our message. No one was talking about working people. No one was focusing on working people issues. Now all of a sudden, every politician that stands up and gives a stump speech, they never intended to run for office. They're a normal person. They care about normal people. This has been my message since day one, fighting for, labor. But I do think it's very important for people to research their candidates. And if we want change, we have to do something different. So I'd encourage everybody to go to velezfortexas.com, check out our campaign. And if it's something you can align with, hey, reach out to us. We'd love to chat with you.
Well, thank you for coming by today.
Marcos Vélez is a candidate for Lieutenant Governor. Marcos, again, thanks for joining us today on Hello Houston.
Appreciate you guys.